2020 has seen the launch of more than a few great games, but as always, with the good comes the bad, and there have been some bad releases over the past 6 months as well. In this feature, that's what we'll be talking about as we list the 15 games of 2020 so far that we've liked the least. So without further ado, let's begin. Disaster Report 4 Plus. Disaster Report 4 had quite a tumultuous cycle, but after upheavals because of unfortunate circumstances, the game came out earlier this year in the West, 2 years after its Japanese launch. Sadly, it wasn't worth the wait. Bogged down by poor production values, repetitive and uninspired quest design, terrible controls, and boring puzzles, it's a game that has some appeal, but only on paper. RBI Baseball 20. With a decent selection of baseball games available on the market, RBI Baseball 20 brings nothing special to the table. It is mechanically shallow and uninteresting, it looks horribly dated, at times almost shockingly so, and it doesn't really have enough depth in content to keep players engaged for any decent amount of time. If you're looking for a good baseball game to sink time into, there are far better options out there. Overpass. A classic case of poor execution letting down what on paper seems like a genuinely interesting idea. Overpass, with its slow and methodical gameplay, tries to make its events seem almost like puzzle boxes to overcome, but when you get down to playing it, it's just slow and boring. On top of that, the game has very little content on offer, and combined with its dated visuals, it's just not a game that can be easily recommended to most people. Warcraft 3 Reforged. A remaster that somehow actively makes the base game worse is already a recipe for disaster. But when that remaster is for a game as beloved and legendary as Warcraft 3, you just know it's going down in the history books, for all of the wrong reasons. Bugs, poor design choices, shoddy remastering work are bad enough, but the game lacks so many of the changes and improvements that were promised pre-release. Add to that the fact that the game shares the same client as the original and in effect essentially replaces it, and Blizzard's ownership of user-generated content, and what you have is a remaster that tarnishes the legacy of an all-time classic. Liberated. When you see a game like Liberated, which at first glance looks so unique you want it to succeed, but Liberated just couldn't live up to a promising first impression. It completely squanders the potential of its rich premise, with an unoriginal story and underdeveloped characters, while on the gameplay side of things, simplistic combat and stealth are, plainly put, just not fun to engage with. Sure, it looks great, nothing can take that away from the game, but on the whole, it's a disappointing case of wasted potential. Fledgling Heroes. Fledgling Heroes, unlike some other games on this list, has a few things going for it that deserve actual praise. It looks great, for starters, with a vibrant and colorful art style, while it also has a surprisingly fun level editor. Beyond that though, there isn't much else to like. It feels like a game stuck in the past, and though it can be fun at times, it's also over far too quickly. On top of its lack of content, it also feels like a game that's far too simplistic, which means any engagement it offers will be very, very short-lived. Gigantosaurus The Game. As is the case with most licensed games, it would be foolish to expect Gigantosaurus The Game to be anything special, but even in the absence of such expectations, it's a pretty mediocre game. There's fun to be had occasionally, sure, but the game constantly stumbles over numerous hurdles. Pervasive technical issues, dated visuals, and a complete lack of challenge that takes away any level of engagement are just a few of the many issues that plague this game. Mafia 2 Definitive Edition. Mafia 2 Definitive Edition is, of course, bogged down by the flaws that hampered the original game. A dull and lifeless open world, boring gunplay, and uninspired mission design. Of course, it wouldn't be fair to expect a remaster to fix all of those issues. What really stings with this one is the fact that it doesn't even succeed as a remaster. The updates made to the visuals barely even do the minimum. There are numerous audio issues and glitches. The frame rate is absolutely shocking, and other technical issues such as texture pop-in are far too abundant. Though the box says Definitive Edition, it's really just a glorified texture pack and not even a very good one at that.
Ultimately, the biggest problem I found with Hunting Simulator 2 is that its gameplay doesn't make up for its lack of progression. From the outset, you're given enough credits to buy guns of almost any caliber and licenses for any animal. It doesn't set out a path for you to start with small and easy targets like ducks or foxes, and organically improve to more difficult targets like bears or cougars. There's no final goal because everything is available from the start. In this sense, it's true to form as a simulation because you're given the freedom to do anything you want, but the moment-to-moment gameplay is too slow and inconsistent to make up for that. The only gameplay loop is selling animals for credits to buy different guns and licenses, but because I was given enough credits to buy serviceable guns and most licenses from the start, I didn't find the act of hunting to be consistently satisfying or substantial enough to make me want to keep playing and collect everything from the store, nor did it entice me with the potential of hunting bigger and better enemies the more I played.
Someday You'll Return. On paper, Someday You'll Return has all of the ingredients in place for what could be a good horror experience, but the sum of its parts is a total letdown. Shoddy writing and an over-reliance on tired tropes fail to make use of the game's intriguing setting, all of which is compounded by poor voice acting. Gameplay-wise, it's fairly dull and uninteresting as well, with mechanics that feel shoehorned into a game where they have no place. Most of all, Someday You'll Return fails where no horror game should. It is not tense or scary. At all. Dawn of Fear. Dawn of Fear deserves props for its insistence on delivering a classic old-school fixed-camera horror game in the vein of older Resident Evil and Silent Hill games. But beyond that, there's not much else here to like. Poorly balanced weapons that ruin the flow of gameplay, a laundry list of technical issues that actively get in the way of enjoyment, tons of visual bugs and performance problems, and the list just goes on. If you really want to revisit classic old-school survival horror games, well, maybe play the Resident Evil remasters on modern consoles instead. Waking. Waking is a purely experimental game, made by one person who clearly had some fascinating ideas about how to blend various genres into a unique, introspective game unlike no other. Sadly, it's also a classic case of a game completely failing to execute its unique ideas. Its story seems to be at odds with the nature of the overall experience. Clunky mechanics let the combat down, the visuals are shockingly bad at times, and by and large it just feels like a frustratingly repetitive experience. That's a big bummer, because a well-made game with Waking's unique ideas could have been truly special. Help Will Come Tomorrow. There's plenty of stuff to like in Help Will Come Tomorrow. It's got a great setting that it uses very well. It has solid writing that effectively builds up its characters, and it looks pretty good. Unfortunately, the gameplay is mediocre at best, which is not good for, a game. Simultaneously simplistic and frustrating, Help Will Come Tomorrow is just no fun at all to play. It feels undercooked, and its confusing design choices constantly seem to be at odds with one another. Rugby 20. Rugby is definitely one of the less popular sports in the video game space. So for those aching for a good rugby game, this might be right up your alley. Just be prepared to deal with an inconsistent experience. The core issues ensure that this isn't a game that you might be able to spend too much time with, from occasionally confusing controls to shoddy production values to a painfully limited selection of modes. The Elder Scrolls Blades. The Elder Scrolls Blades was never going to be a full-fledged Elder Scrolls experience, and expecting anything along those lines would have always led to disappointment. Sadly, expecting anything good will also lead to disappointment here. Blades has boring, simplistic combat, an excess of mechanics that are constantly pushing you to spend more money, dreadful and bland environments, which are more often than not hyperlinear and dull dungeons, and a surprising amount of technical issues. It uses the fact that it's a mobile game as a sorry excuse for being a poor product. And that about does it for this video. If you enjoyed what you watched and want to see more from GamingBolt, you can always hit that subscribe button and turn on the bell icon next to it. That way you will never miss any of our videos.